We would like to welcome you to a presentation of August Publications. I'm Jesse Goldberg Strassler. Welcome in. There's an exciting event that's going to be taking place at the Los Angeles Public Library. And to dig more into what is exciting, what we have going on, let me first bring in the owner and publisher of August Publications, Kevin Reichard. Kevin, Picasso had his blue period, and you are entering your Dodger blue period.
The best art I ever bought at a Culver's.
So we have several wonderful releases. Steve Dittmore wrote Jim Gilliam, The Forgotten Dodger. Eric Vickrey wrote Before They Wore Dodger Blue, Tommy Lasorda and the Greatest Draft Class in Baseball History. And let me begin with you, Dr. Dittmore. Dr. Steve Dittmore is the Dean of the Silverfield College of Education and Human Services at the University of North Florida. And as Dr. Lewis Moore at Michigan State University wrote, this is a riveting story about an all-time great Dodger that time forgot. But Dr. Dittmore, you did not forget him. How did you start writing this?
It goes back to COVID, actually. I had wanted to write a book and have found myself with a little bit more free time on my hands. I was working at the University of Arkansas at the time, but I'm a lifelong Dodgers fan. Grew up in Los Angeles until first grade, lived there in the 1970s, and really, as I've evolved as a fan of baseball, became a fan of the Negro Leagues, became a fan of the 1960s, and I kept seeing Jim Gilliam's name all over everything with respect to the Dodgers. However, it wasn't he just, people didn't remember him in terms of the same way that they recalled Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale of the 60s, or, Campanella and Robinson and Pee Wee and those folks of the 1950s. Yet when you start looking at it, Gilliam played on 7 World Series teams for the Dodgers. He won 4 World Series titles. He is the only player in Dodger history to appear in 4 World Series winning um, teams. Koufax and Padres were on the rosters for 4, but didn't appear. Koufax didn't appear in 55, and Padres did not appear in 65. So, you look at that, and he's a significant figure in baseball, both from a integration standpoint as kind of that second wave of black athletes that came in from the Negro Leagues after Jackie Robinson and Monty Irvin and Willie Mays and some of those others. And then, he was a significant figure in the integration of the coaching ranks. Never got a chance to manage, but his number is retired by the Dodgers, something that happened in 1978 when he passed away. And I think the average Dodger fan goes to Dodger Stadium and looks at 19 and goes, "Huh, who is that?" But it's funny. I connected with a lot of people in the research process through social media that were from Brooklyn. A lot of people that grew up in the Brooklyn area in the 1950s, and every one of them said, "Oh, he's not forgotten." Reminded me quite a bit that the title, "The Forgotten Dodger," is they didn't forget him for sure.
Eric Vickrey is the writer of Before They Wore Dodger Blue, Tommy Lasorda and the Greatest Draft Class in Baseball History. The third member of your panel on Saturday, April 11th at the Los Angeles Public Library, running from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., is Fred Claire. And Steve, you just mentioned Jim Gilliam's number's retired. Fred Claire was involved in those conversations to retire Jim Gilliam's number. Eric, is it true that Fred was part of the impetus that led to you writing your book? You're muted.
Very sorry about that. My cats were going a little crazy, so I thought I'd mute myself when I wasn't talking. Yeah, Fred and I connected really early in the process. I let him know that I was writing this book, and I knew he was had been involved in the Dodgers since the late '60s, first as a sports writer and then as a front office executive. And he was really ecstatic about the project and put me in contact with a lot of the key figures and has been really supportive throughout the process. So having Fred participate in this panel at the library is going to be a true honor for sure.
Each of you does so well in setting the context, the time and place. Eric, one thing that I really enjoy is you detailing basically the history of scouting and the scouting that led to the formation of the Major League Baseball draft in the first place. What did you learn?
Yeah, that was when I set out to write this book, my first goal was to tell the story of the 1970 Spokane Indians, and then I realized really the bigger story is the Dodgers '68 draft, and through that, it allowed me to tell the story of the Major League Baseball's adoption of the draft in 1965, and of course, scouting uh, played a big role throughout the story as well. So, yeah, before 1965, Major League Baseball acquired talent. It was kind of a free-for-all. Any team could sign any player. It was the so-called bonus baby era where if players signed for over a certain amount, they would have to be kept on the big league roster. Guys like Koufax ended up sitting on the bench for several years because of that. And with that, salaries are skyrocketing from the late 40s into the mid 60s. And so the owners finally decided to adopt a draft in 65, mainly to suppress salaries. That was the ultimate goal, and it did have that effect. And so in 65, they instituted the draft. It kind of suppressed the Dodgers' advantage. The Dodgers had long been at the forefront of signing and developing talent. They had deep pockets, but suddenly the draft kind of leveled the playing field. And so the '68 draft really was key to catapulting them back to success in the early '70s.
This is the generation to generation. So we've got Tommy Lasorda as a scout, and then the Dodgers fervently opposed to the draft, and then the draft is instituted. But just to go back before that, Steve, we're talking about how Jim Gilliam was discovered. You take us into Nashville, where he grew up, and then to the Baltimore Elite Giants.
Yeah.
Take me through you painting that picture of the Nashville that Jim Gilliam grew up in.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a place that no longer exists exactly that way, but the structures and some of the significant places still are there. He grew up in segregated Nashville in the 1930s, born in 1928, and there was a whole culture around North Nashville and the Black Nashville area, and I was fortunate to talk to a Negro League star's daughter, Henry Kimbrough's daughter, Harriet Kimbrough Hamilton, for the book. And she painted this picture about how it was a vibrant place where Black commerce thrived. Gilliam was born at the Meharry Medical Center, which was the preeminent Black hospital in Nashville at the time. It still exists, now part of a larger healthcare system in Nashville. He grew up playing at Sulphur Dell, a ballpark that was in downtown Nashville. There's a sign now kind of commemorating it, but the current First Horizon ballpark in Nashville, where the Nashville Sounds play, kind of rests on the site of where Sulphur Dell was. But he played with white kids, played with black kids. He didn't. That was more of the sandlot, the pickup, the recreational type thing. Structurally, he was still going to segregated black schools. It was pre-Brown versus Board of Education, so he attended Pearl High School, dropped out as after the 11th grade, never finished high school because he got a job, as you mentioned, with the Baltimore Eli Giants. They signed him to a contract, and he made the 1946 team as a 17-year-old playing in the Negro Leagues at the highest level of competition. He didn't play a lot that first year, but he was on the field with Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard and all the other stars, Cool Papa Bello of the era. He was playing against those individuals, or at least on the same field with them. He jokes in one of the places I found some attribution from him, that he didn't get an education in terms of writing and arithmetic and all of that sort of thing, science and whatnot, but he got an education in life by traveling across the South and being a part of the Baltimore Eli Giants. Before that, he spent a year with the Nashville Black Vols of the Negro Southern League, the 1945 season. He played with them as a 16-year-old. So he definitely got his education in the kind of the real life rather than through a traditional classroom setting.
Something that immediately grabbed me about your book, me growing up as a baseball fan and reading about the Brooklyn Dodgers, I would immediately think Junior Gilliam instead of Jim Gilliam.
Yeah.
How do you think of him, Junior or Jim?
I think of him as Jim because, that's what he was in the 70s. Yes, colloquially, people refer to him as Junior. Those previously mentioned Brooklyn Dodgers fans still call him Junior. He was never Jim to them. He was always Junior in the 1950s. It was a moniker given to him by George Scales, who was coaching with the Baltimore Eli Giants at the time, and it was something that, near as I can tell, the stories kind of get cloudy, but near as I can tell, it was a case where he yelled at Gilliam, who kept missing ground or kept missing curveballs. Hey, Junior, stand over on the other side of the plate and see if you can hit it that way. And that's kind of what made him a switch hitter, but it also gave him that nickname of Junior, and it did stick with him throughout his life. But I think it was interesting, and this is one of the reasons I refer to him as Jim, is he never signed anything Junior Gilliam. He always signed it Jim Gilliam, and his formal name was James. So occasionally, I think he signed a couple things James, but everything else that I've always seen has just been Jim Gilliam.
Walter Alston is depicted in one light in your book. And Eric, it's a different side of Walter that we see because one of Gilliam's short-lived teammates, Tommy Lasorda's path to the minors is brought up and he gets brought up to the major leagues and he doesn't pitch all that much because Walter Alston is relying on his veterans. There is so much gold of Tommy Lasorda. The book serves as you just pause everything and you go, let's just tell Lasorda stories as you go into this biography. How much fun did you have?
Oh yeah, that was a blast, and definitely that's something that happened kind of as the book evolved. I didn't really set out to write a book about Tommy Lasorda, but it kind of turned into that in some ways, because he had such a fascinating story and he was such an amazing character, truly one of the great characters of all time. So, yeah, talking to a lot of his former players and gathering their stories of him from rookie ball up through AAA as he was rising as a up and coming manager was a lot of fun. And then digging back into his playing career also was a lot of fun. I really didn't realize he was a really successful AAA pitcher. Won something close to 100 games in AAA in Montreal. But yeah, never really got a chance in the big leagues. You mentioned Alston in 55, 56, they were in the middle of pennant races, and so Lasorda was kind of the last man on the roster when he was on the team, and only got into a handful of games. His lifetime record ended up being 0-4 with a ERA over 6. Um, so he really made his mark first as a scout, and then of course as a manager.
Steve, you mentioned your conversation with Harriet. Both of you conducted so many interviews, had so many great conversations that you brought into this book. So, first, Steve, and then Eric, uh, can you take me through some of the stories that you learned from the interviews that completely surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that stood out to me, and I was fortunate to connect with so many different people, and unfortunately, several people I talked to have since passed away. I was able to, because I started the research kind of in 2020, connect with people like Carl Erskine and Bobby Morgan and Al Ferrara and some other individuals that were contemporaries of Gilliam in the 50s and 60s that are no longer with us. I, I connected with Peter O'Malley, which I found to be just a fascinating, very brief, maybe 15-minute conversation, but he was extremely frank and direct about um, Gilliam, who he was as an individual. Peter O'Malley, of course, the son of Walter O'Malley and the owner of the Dodgers, president of the Dodgers in the 1970s. Um, and he talked about retiring the number. And he made a point, defended the decision because the Dodgers have this history of, for a long time, Gilliam was the only player not in the Baseball Hall of Fame with his number retired. Now, the Dodgers have since retired at 34 for Fernando Valenzuela. So there are two Dodgers now with numbers retired that are not in the Hall of Fame. Um, and O'Malley walked me through the decision-making process and said, I understand why people were upset that we didn't retire Gil Hodges' number, or at the time they hadn't retired Fernando or Fernando's number. But Gilliam was everything that we wanted out of a Dodger. He was class. He was with the organization for a quarter century from the time that he started playing in the minors till the time that he passed away, 27 years. And he just did everything that Dodgers asked. And just hearing, and I talked to Fred Clare as well, and Fred wrote the foreword for the book. And, both of them just had glowing things to say about Gilliam. And so for me to be able to talk to individuals that um, had such clear crystal memories of something that happened 50 years ago nearly, that was great to me.
Eric, as you're going through and chronicling this incredible class of the Dodgers 1968 draft, Doyle Alexander and Bill Buckner and Ron Cey and Steve Garvey and Davey Lopes and Tom Paciorek and Joe Ferguson and Bobby Valentine and Jeff Zahn and onward, and you're telling the story of Tommy Lasorda and Al Campanis, what conversation stood out to you?
Wow. Narrowing it down to one would be tough.
You don't have to narrow it down to one.
But I will say probably Bobby Valentine, if I did have to pick one. I spent about 2 hours on the phone with Bobby. He was very generous with his time and had such fond memories of his minor league career coming up with the Dodgers and playing for Lasorda. And a lot of people don't realize that Bobby Valentine was the Dodgers' first round pick and the best prospect out of the 68 draft. And many thought he was on a trajectory for a Hall of Fame career. But unfortunately, injuries ultimately sidelined his playing career. But he was a tremendous character, in many ways similar to Tommy Lasorda. Tommy was like a father to Bobby, and definitely shaped the way he managed later in his career. So just talking to him and hearing stories of bus rides from rookie ball and AAA Spokane, and some of the antics they would pull was probably the biggest joy for me through this process.
The
Yeah,
whole what?
Jesse,
Go ahead,
if I may,
Steve.
just real quick, Eric and I have talked, and I think he and I share very similar experiences on this, is that I found in terms of talking to players and teammates, talking to the non-stars, kind of the role players, if you will, was way more interesting and way more fun. I had a great conversation with John Warehouse, Nate Oliver, Daryl Griffith, who just, couldn't overcome injuries in the 1960s with the Dodgers and things like that. Al Ferrara, as I mentioned earlier, they just had such fond memories of Gilliam. And, they all collectively probably had fewer than 1,000 major league games, but they just all had interesting stories to tell. And another one that was around the same time of Eric's book was Billy Grabarkowitz, who I had a chance to speak to. He was that middle infield guy that Gilliam was coaching as part of the infield. And he had some really fascinating stories about how he was treated in spring training. The Dodgers moved players around a lot. He just never felt he had a position. So I think, Eric, you had similar experiences with kind of the role players.
Absolutely. And I even got to talk to the Bat Boy and Clubhouse Boys for the Spokane Indians. And of course, that summer of 70, being around those guys stands out to them as one of the best summers of their lives. So they were very willing and eager to share their story. So yeah, I like Steve said, some of the best stories don't always come from the superstars. It's the cup of coffee players or people, not even players, people who are just involved in the periphery and have fond memories of those days.
As you're both looking at resources, and Eric, I'm going to turn to you first. It takes you down some unexpected avenues, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. In writing this book, I had a rough outline, but you stumble across different stories and headlines, and then that kind of takes you into a different direction. Kind of like with this book, ultimately, being kind of centered around the Dodgers 68 draft, which is still to this day considered the best draft in history. So that kind of became the focus of the book, and finding just different resources as a researcher. Newspapers.com is of course endless trove of material, and then just finding nuggets in books and interviews and kind of putting it all together is a fun part of the process.
You mentioning that and how the draft is considered today, both of you do such a good job of taking this that happened in whether it's the 40s, the 50s, the 60s for Jim Gilliam, or whether it's the 1968 draft, everything leading up to it, and then how the players played in the 1970s, and then putting it into today's terms and saying, here's how we should consider Jim Gilliam historically. Here's how we should consider these players historically. For you, Steve, Jim Gilliam is a guy who you detail in the book. He's not going to talk about himself. He's very reserved. He's going to play whatever position you need him to play. So as you're going through and going, what can I do to properly help you, the reader, understand what kind of player he was?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, looking back at his career as a whole, is really an interesting case study because he started more opening days on the bench than he did in the starting lineup. He played second base, third base, left field primarily, but also logged innings at first base, right field, center field, played all over the diamond. At the end of his career, he is right now currently among the top 10 all-time Dodgers players in WAR. So, I mean, talking about contemporary statistics, he has a 40.8 WAR, offensive WAR. So he had a significant role with the Dodgers. He is still in the top 10 in at least one all-time World Series category, bases on balls. And he is just outside the top 10, just behind Derek Jeter in games played in World Series history. So he literally is right there among all of the great players of baseball history from the 50s on down through the contemporary. He doesn't get that kind of credit. He just doesn't get that. And I think one of the things I attempted to do with the book was to kind of position it as these different gates that he had to go through. So you had the gate that Jackie Robinson went through with regard to integrating organized baseball in 1947. Gilliam was a member of the Baltimore Eli Giants. Then you get to this unspoken quota. And I try to make the case in the book that Gilliam's seasons in 51 and 52 with the Montreal Royals were major league caliber seasons. He was MVP of the International League in 52. He was runner-up in 51. He could have probably helped the Dodgers, but the Dodgers already had four black players on their roster and they weren't ready to go to that fifth. So there was this quota. No major league team had done that. So he finally becomes part of the team. The Dodgers in 1954 started five black players in a game. They become the first team to have a majority black lineup. And then it was the gate to become a coach. At what point is a black male going to become a coach of a pro team on the base paths as the first or the third base coach? And Gilliam was the first one of that. And then the last gate was something he never got a chance to do, which was manage. Frank Robinson, of course, in 1975 became the first black manager. But I found a whole lot, you're talking about the research process, I found a whole lot of conversations, a whole lot of material in which Gilliam was mentioned very prominently as being somebody who could be the first black manager in baseball history, but he just never got that chance.
Yeah, your whole why is Maury Wills being pushed forward? Where's Jim
Right.
Gilliam? This whole conversation just putting us right there. Eric, there was something that Steve just said that I really appreciated that I want to frame in his words to you. What did you attempt to do with your book?
Muted again, Eric.
Sorry about that. Yeah, with this book, I really just wanted to tell the story of this amazing draft class and this juggernaut of a minor league team. I consider the draft class the best of all time, and the minor league team, certainly the 70 Spokane Indians, rank among the best minor league teams of all time. So that was my initial goal, was just to tell the story of those teams uh, under the scope of the Dodgers franchise. One of the great franchises in the game. Uh, in terms of success, as well as just developing these amazingly talented players going back to the 40s. So that was my ultimate goal with the book.
The what if?
Jesse, I'm sorry, Jesse, I'm cutting you off again. I apologize. But one of the things that I think Eric and I found really interesting about Eric's book was we've talked a little bit around it here, but the interconnectedness of this. So Gilliam and Lasorda were teammates in Montreal in the 1950s as part of the Montreal Royals. Gilliam was the first base coach, and Lasorda was the third base coach in the early 70s with the Dodgers under Walt Alston. There was a whole lot of should Gilliam be considered for the manager job when Alston stepped down? Should it be Lasorda? I remember talking and asking Peter O'Malley and Fred Clare about that, and they all said that Lasorda was clearly the one for it, and I think it had to do with there being opposite personalities there between Lasorda and Gilliam. But a lot of the players that were in that 68 draft, Gilliam, while Lasorda was managing them in the minors, Gilliam was working with them in spring training and at the camps and things like that. So it just, yeah, I mean, it's this conversation started because I think there's some real synergies between these two books. And Yeah, I just think it's kind of fascinating that we did these things totally independent of one another and kind of had a lot of overlap.
Eric, what jumped out to you from Steve's book?
Oh, I love Steve's book. And I'm a lifelong baseball fan. Uh, really have dug into the histories of the game since I was a kid. I used to write letters to former players and ask for autographs, uh, and so going back to my childhood, just been a fan of the history of the game, but I virtually knew nothing about Jim Gilliam. I knew the name, I knew he was a part of those Dodgers teams in the 50s and 60s, but had no idea how good of a player he was. And Steve mentioned his lifetime WAR. That's uh, to have that top 10 WAR in Dodgers history says a lot. And I think he was, kind of underappreciated at the time too, just in terms of his on base skills. I think a guy like that now would be a little more appreciated just in terms of his ability to set the table and get on base, and his versatility. So yeah, just I had a blast reading Steve's book and learning about this very under the radar player who was certainly deserving of the book, and Steve told it very well.
As we wrap things up, Kevin Reichard, I want to bring you back in for your thoughts for what jumped out to you as you read Jim Gilliam, The Forgotten Dodger, and Before They Wore Dodger Blue.
Well, I want to say that both these books were exceedingly easy to edit, to be totally honest. The writing in both cases was just phenomenal. I think in both cases there was one big move to be made in each book in terms of changing some chapter stuff and buttressing the end of Eric's book. But man, it was such a joy to edit both books, to read them. And what I appreciated about both books, especially from the authors, is their ability to tell stories. I mean, a lot of baseball writing is just a lot of sheer reciting of statistics and the statistics are there, but it's more interesting to have Bobby Valentine talk about how much he loved Tommy Lasorda and Eric covering Tommy's last days and funeral and what the players reacted to was just perfect. And so I'm really proud of both these books, and I just can't tell you if you've not read them, buy them because they're both just outstanding pieces of writing.
I felt something. Justice for Jim Gilliam was what I was thinking throughout reading your book, Steve. And
Oh,
Eric, my God, I'm going, why didn't the Cubs draft Johnny Bench? So
At
the
some
stories.
at some point, someone's going to do a book on missed worked outs and missed drafts like that, not drafting Johnny Bench. I mean, I learned something the other day I didn't know that Jackie Robinson actually tried out for the Red Sox at Fenway Park, his only time in Fenway Park, by the way. And the black sports writers of the era thought there was a good chance he would be signed by the Red Sox, which, when you look back at it today, you're going, probably not. But the fact that it was discussed as a possibility in what was that, 1942, Eric, in that era, amazingly early in his career, says to me there's a lot of stories from that era still to be uncovered.
No doubt, yeah, and like with the Negro Leagues, there's so much that's unfortunately that was not documented at the time, and or that's now being discovered in newspaper archives. So yeah, so many stories still out there, and I think yeah, Steve and I stumbled across a couple of good stories that had flown under the radar.
yeah,
Many good
Jesse, you were
stories.
talking about the Cubs, and I'm like the assumption you're a Cubs fan since you were so adamant about them not getting Johnny Bench. But Cubs tried out Jim Gilliam in spring of 1950 and opted to sign Gene Baker instead. And Baker turned out to be a very serviceable infielder along with Ernie Banks. But you could have had Ernie Banks at short and Jim Gilliam at second all through the 50s and 60s with the
Mm.
Cubs.
And the Dodgers had Roberto Clemente.
And the Dodgers had Roberto Clemente,
No.
who Gilliam played with in the Puerto Rican Winter League one year when Clemente was 18 years old.
And Tommy
Yeah,
Lasorda started the brawl in Cuba. And what,
yeah,
but both of you have done a great service within the bigger service, all of the smaller services of just saying, hey, here, read this book and learn so much because there's the larger idea at hand and then there's everything within every chapter. And I greatly appreciate it. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to mention that Al Campanis signed Roberto Clemente, and of course Al Campanis was the architect of the Dodgers '68 draft. So, um, yeah, he was another throughput to the story. And unfortunately, most people remember Al Campanis for his unfortunate words on Nightline in 1987 that ended his career. But he was instrumental to the Dodgers' success in the '50s and '60s and '70s.
Ended his career, and he was replaced by Fred Clare, who will join Steve and Eric on the panel Saturday, April the 11th, Los Angeles Public Library from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. at the Central Library Art Department. Free event, but reserve your spot. And this will all be moderated by the LA Daily News' Tom Hoffarth. Steve, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time and congratulations.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jesse and
Jesse.
Kevin.
I'm
Appreciate
Jesse
it.
Goldberg Strasser for Dr. Steve Dittmore and for Eric Vickrey. Kevin Reichardt, August Publications, thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it.